All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to Dichotomology. My name is Dylan Decal, and I'm going to go over change versus stability today, and the dichotomy at play there. And I want to caveat by saying, again, that this is not an attempt to place everything into one camp or the other. I understand that there's a lot of overlap between these ideas, and that's the challenge that dichotomy tries to overcome, is that it makes an extreme case for both sides, so you understand the full dichotomy here. You're supposed to understand the full breadth of what is possible and make an extreme case for each side so that you can fully understand what's at play and where along these differences we're supposed to be. So change and stability are both equally important, and if we have too much of either, you get problems. So too much change, we have no grounding in anything, or we could lose our meaning and everything's just changing constantly. There's nothing grounding us to anything. So we would just have change for the sake of change. And then stability, never changing, never adapting, never allowing for the betterment of society. And you guys are going to see that both are important, but you can also see where it's obvious that they go wrong. So the true dichotomy of change versus stability is a fundamental aspect of both individual lives and societal structures. The true dichotomy reflects the dynamic interplay between the forces that drive progress and those that preserve order. Understanding the balance is crucial for navigating personal growth, societal development, and environmental adaptation. Seemingly contradictory, the left hemisphere so the left hemisphere likes change while the right hemisphere likes stability. And that seems opposite, right? Because it's like, well, if that one's expanding, wouldn't it like the expansive nature of things and like everything to be chaotic and more chaotic? It's like, well, no, it wants the opposite. It's trying to find its grounding, which is what religion is supposed to do. And it does help a lot of people. It's like, if you're more of a right hemispheric person, religion helps ground those intuitions. It grounds those feelings and emotions and all those other aspects of what's true, of reality. So it tries to ground them in something real, and that's what the narratives of the Bible do. And on the other hand, you have the left hemispheric way of thinking, which is very literal, it's specific. It's like here, but we don't really have a good way to prevent that from going to extreme, which is what, again, that's what dichotomology is for. It's like, here's this scientific way of thinking. It's much more difficult to say when it goes wrong, because all it cares about is care and harm, care for groups and individuals and harm to individuals and groups. It's like, well, if that's the only thing you care about, like, there's no argument to say that you shouldn't do nothing but do that. Like, what's a good argument for that? Well, dichotomology is a good argument against that. It's like, if you only care about one thing and also try to take that to the extreme, in other words, become an ideologue, there's no good that comes of it, because there's always a downside whenever you head towards an extreme point of view. And that's what I argue for. So every single one of these examples is showing you, here's the extreme, stay away from it. I'm not telling you where to go. And that's the most important thing, is like, most philosophies tell you this is right or this is wrong, whereas this tells you just what's wrong, and like, and how to aim, how to, somewhat have some play in orienting us towards what's right or true. Okay, so that's the difference between the left and right hemisphere. The left likes stability, or the left likes change, and the right likes stability. So that's what it also makes sense when it comes to liberals. They're the ones who want constant change, even though they think in this very specific, very rational, very scientific way, using data and empiricism. It's like, yeah, all that stuff is simple, and yet they want everything to constantly change as a result. So everything's so specific and yes or no, black and white, good or bad. And it's so much easier to think that way with the left hemisphere. And that's why they also like animes. Like, animes are very cut and dry. It's like, here's somebody that's good, here's somebody that's bad. I know who the bad guy is. Whereas reality is a lot messier. Like, you're not sure. Like, Biden's good, Biden's bad. Trump's good, Trump is bad. There's elements of them that we understand. Like, that's what the Bible teaches you. It's like everyone has characteristics about them that are inherently evil, and they need to look out for to make sure they don't go to the extreme. So that's what we have to be careful for, is to understand, like, hey, each one of us, where we can go wrong, and we need people to hold that back. So when you're more neurotic, chaotic, expansive, indecisive, intuition-driven individual, you tend to seek out things that will bring balance and stability. And that makes sense, right? Like if you're constantly worried all the time, if you're constantly like drawing connections between that things that aren't connected, you need somebody to ground you and be like, hey, look, this connection isn't true. And you're worried about things that aren't necessarily going to affect you. And, all the other things that's, left hemisphere can rationalize and bring stability about. So, and when you're of that kind of mind, you want stability. So this is why women seek out stable, stoic nature of men and the stability that they offer in terms of financial support and protection. It's like of your hemisphere. It's a natural tendency of your hemispheric perspective to seek that out. And obviously it also, you take your children into account. So like, even though you're in that chaotic nature and you're seeking that, you're taking all these things into account. And that's what makes you seek out males, So, and the opposite is true of males. So if I were to make an extreme case again for the way males think on average, it's decisive, systematic, and they try to seek out novelty, challenges, new prey, and often create problems on purpose to make this possible. This is why men are so industrious and motivated to compete. So obviously there's a lot to both of these. I can go on connecting all kinds of things for hours, but basically the left and right hemisphere is associated with change and stability in its own way. So the right is coming up with all these ideas and connections and change, but the left is coming up with a solution for it. But it's also the left that's seeking that right hemispheric way of thinking so it can have those problems to solve. And that's why it's like it's a mutual exchange between your hemispheres, just like it's a mutual exchange between males and females. It's a mutual exchange between ourselves and our society. It's like all these concepts are connected at every level of analysis. So it's the same with, molecules, change versus stability. Like they seek, when they're constantly changing, like the more chaotic an element is, the more it's trying to seek out, you could say, that stability. And once it seeks the stability, it's calm. It's just chilling. And that's what happens when it gets enough, electrons. But I'm just getting into like the chemistry of it. It's like, all right, and the physics. It's like, well, okay, well, if that's the way it works at every level of analysis, then it's something that's very true of reality, like nascently true, like intrinsic to reality is this concept of mutual reciprocal cooperation and seeking out the opposite. So if you're just chilling, you probably want to seek out a chaotic thing. And if you're just chaotic, you're probably trying to seek out stability. Okay. So it's like meta truths. Okay, so here we go. We're going to try to rationalize the extreme now that we've kind of gone over, the rationalism perspective, the intuitionist perspective, which is more female, more male. Stability. While it's stable, it seeks out, complexity and holistic. So, and then while it's chaotic and expansive, it seeks out that stability. So both are seeking out each other's perspective in that way. Okay, so extreme change involves a relentless pursuit of novelty, transformation without consideration for stability, direction, or consequences. I didn't realize I made it so big. Stability without consideration for the direction or consequences. It prioritizes change as an end rather than means to an end to improve an improved state. So when you're constantly changing something, there's no direction, there's no meaning, and there's no association with anything that you would have a relationship with. And if you're not considering your relationship in what you're trying to change, then you're changing it for the sake of change because you don't like the status quo. There's something inherently wrong that you feel is being done to you or done to others that you think it should just change or end. And you don't realize in doing so, you're going to create so much chaos that people aren't going to have a way to protect themselves from those who would take advantage of them. So it's hard not to think that people that are seeking out to end all of civilization want nothing but death and destruction for everyone. But at the same time, change is a necessary product of our societies, and like understanding the world better, updating our information, updating our knowledge, gaining a better understanding of reality itself. And that's, I mean, I really hope that dichotomology helps, guide people to that understanding. But, some of the characteristics of extreme change would be relentless or restless instability, constantly seeking new experience and changes, leading to a state of perpetual flux. It would have lack of continuity, frequent shifts in policies, practices, and societal norms that disrupt continuity and coherence. So obviously, nobody will know if you don't know which thing to value, or if you don't have a hierarchy of values, then this constantly seeking of changes is going to happen, and then you don't know what to value, and people are going to value different things, and then it's just going to be completely subjective, and then you just eventually just gets you to postmodernism. Yes, that sounds like a slippery slope, but the more we lean into that as a society, the worse that becomes. And right now we're going through way too much change, way too fast, without any forethought. Like the whole transgender movement, like it's a way of seeking the care and harm, preventing the harm and taking care of individuals or that group. And in doing so, we completely ignore these other aspects that are important to our society, like, women's female spaces, to make sure that they have a way to compete. So I don't actually need this. And then you have left hemispheric preferences driven by the left hemisphere tendency to seek novelty, explore new possibilities, and challenge the status quo. This preference can stem from a desire to overcome boredom or dissatisfaction with the current situation. So again, the left hemisphere, even though it's logical, rational, all these other things, it's seeking out those challenges. It's seeking out prey. It's seeking out that hedonistic pleasure. It's seeking out all these other simple, specific things that make its life easier. So, but it's also like it wants the challenge, so it also wants to make it harder. So it's complicated. But that's kind of the left hemispheric perspective. Okay, so manifestation realities of people's personal lives, frequent career changes, constant relocation, and habitual experimentation with new lifestyles or ideologies. This is why they all change their hair color, they get tattoos, they do all kinds of things to their bodies. Like they either hate their bodies or they just want that change. They want to experience something new. They want to see individual differences because they're so left hemispheric in nature that they're like, well, if this is like, I want change because it's interesting. So there's an element of hedonism to it, but there's also a level of a natural tendency of the left hemisphere to seek out novelty. And I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that we need to be careful not to let it get out of hand. And like those people that do complete changes to their body for either the sake of being attractive to the opposite sex or for the sake of, just pure pleasure, status seeking, whatever the case may be, rather than this is going to help me in my relationships, not in terms of like getting a relationship, but maintaining relationships. Or like, for example, if you can't have sex because of some issue you're having, it's like, that would be a meaningful thing that you can get a surgery for that would lead to your life and your partner's life improving. That's different than I'm just going to change my nose because I think it's ugly or whatever other aspect. It's like you're completely morphing your body and your being to more align with what the current societal expectation is. And that's not a healthy way to think. Okay, I'm kind of digressing a little bit. But at the societal level, it would just be constant change. So, and the consequences would be disorientation of individuals as societies struggle to have a sense of identity or purpose amidst the constant change. lack of deep roots, relationships, institutions, and cultural practices may become shallow and fragmented, lacking the depth that comes with stability and continuity. Burnout and exhaustion, the relentless pace of change can lead to psychological and emotional fatigue. And that's another thing, is like there's so much change happening. Like people are having a hard time keeping up, especially like if you think of like some of these things lasted thousands of years, like religious practices and the implementation of it in our societies, like these used to last thousands of years. Now it seems like every year there's a new policy that is completely society changing in nature. Like the way just children are brought up, the way they're talked to, like everything, it seems like we're leaning way more towards a lack of responsibility. And obviously it's hard to point to a specific one because there's just so many, but like ones that allow them to prevent you from identifying your kids, or like letting your parents know if your kid identifies as the opposite gender or whatever, if they're at school. That's a terrible practice, and that's an implementation into law in California that says that teachers don't need to tell their parents if their kid transitions, which is pretty bad, because it's like if you do consider that a mental health issue, which most psychologists would argue that's the thing that's happening, then you're basically withholding medical information that could be pertinent to your kid's life from a parent, and that's crazy. Okay, so the opposite would be extreme stability. So extreme stability involves a rigid adherence to the status quo, resisting any form of change or adaptation. It prioritizes maintaining current conditions and structures at all costs, driven by the fear of the unknown and potential negative consequences of change. And we could all think of dozens of examples of countries that do not change. They're trying to maintain the status quo. They're trying to maintain their heritage, their tradition. And it makes sense that they would want to maintain those things, especially in light of how chaotic the Western world is becoming right now and absent of meaning. But if everybody understood dichotomology and that you should stay away from this extreme of instability and chaos and all the, change, like you shouldn't go so extreme to want constant change. Like there's some connection here that you're not making that might be important. So you need to be very wise and very open-minded to the idea that there could be something you're leaving out when it comes to banning assault weapons. Like if it's not even bearing out in the statistics that that's the issue, then you can't even argue that it's something that you would want to get rid of, because in the end it just shows that that's not your goal. Like if your goal wasn't to get rid of pistols, which cause the most death, then it's obvious that your goal is to take away people's rights. Like what other reason could you have if you're not trying to ban pistols? And it's like, yeah, it's crazy to me. Anyways, characteristics are rigidity and resistance. So an unyielding commitment to existing practices, norms, and structures, even when they're outdated or detrimental. So again, like if your society's using like essential oils or other things that it thinks are just going to spiritually heal you, that's not how spirituality works. Spirituality is of your mind. It's a way of thinking. It's a category of thinking, not of a physical interaction or chemistry or any of the other left hemispheric things. It's of your right hemisphere. It's of your connection with everything. That's what spirituality is. It's like your connection with your connection with you across time. It's your connection with everything. So that's how I would define spirituality. It's like it could be you to infinity even. That's kind of a complicated way to think of it. Okay, so in creating these rigid structures and norms, like let's say a lot of the Middle Eastern countries do. I don't have a good example of many others, but I would just say most non-Western countries are very resistant to change at all, whereas we're overly sensitive to change. Like we allow too much change to come in our society. and we need to slow it down a little bit. Our conservatives need to slow it down a little bit and be a little less accepting of that constant change. And that, when you kind of see that happening right now in societies like or Western societies, there's being a lot of pushback. People are being awoken to this new, awoke again to this new perspective of the right hemisphere. And I think it is coming where a lot of people are going to see this different perspective, this whole other hemispheric way of thinking. Whereas we've been training people so hard in this left hemispheric way of thinking from the ground up as a child. But it comes back way harder. So we need to be careful not to drift too far in the other direction where we're too resistant to change, where we don't take new things into consideration, like electric vehicles. Like I've seen so many conservatives that are against electric vehicles because they think it's purely for the reason that the climate reason, and they're pushing it even though they think it's going to be less efficient. They think it's going to be detrimental to society. It still damages the earth. It's like, I don't believe that. Like the research that I have done has led me to the conclusion that electric vehicles will be better for everyone. It'll make goods cheaper. It'll make transportation cheaper. It's just going to take time, and it's going to be a big change for all of society. But I think it's for the sake of the better. And that's all aside from taking the environment into consideration. So even if you don't even take the environment into consideration, electric vehicles will be better for everyone. It's just going to take time for them to meet the criteria to be better in each category. So don't be so resistant to change. It can be good. Just like phones come with, it's such an improvement for society to transmit information so fast, but it's one of those things that has its downsides too, like social media, the hedonistic pleasure that comes with it that we need to overcome, like constantly scrolling through things that give you a dopamine kick. It's like, oh yeah, here's all the cute stuff, here's all the funny stuff, here's all the sexual stuff, whatever. You're going through it, you're not realizing you're just kicking your left hemisphere into overdrive, and then you're going to ignore a lot of your right hemispheric meaning and relationships that you're trying to hold in your life. Okay. So, you have a fear of change, a pervasive fear of what change might bring, leading to a preference for known certainties over potential improvements. So, yes, and this is one of the problems with religion, is like there's no way for it to change because it's word of God and it's so strict. But you have to think all words are rationalizations. They're of the Luciferian intellect and left hemisphere. So in trying to rationalize God in these stories, we are listening to the devil at the same time. So the Bible and these religious texts are supposed to unlock your right hemispheric way of thinking through the Luciferian way of thinking. So when you're reading words, when you're thinking in these words, eventually it'll unlock the connections necessary for you to see God and see the connection between everything. But it's not necessarily to say that it's what you should follow to the letter. And you'll probably realize that once you open up the connection and see everything through your right hemispheric perspective. So the right hemisphere preference with its focus on connections, relationships, and holistic thinking can sometimes favor stability to avoid the chaos and too many changes and new connections. So if you're preferring this right hemispheric way of thinking, again, you're trying to maintain that stability for the sake of not going off into chaos. And that's how you're going to feel constantly because you're more neurotic on average. And I'm almost willing to bet that on average, these countries are more neurotic in everything you'd consider of what I've described as the differences between the left and right hemispheres. Okay, so manifestation reality in people's personal lives, they'd be more reluctant to leave familiar environments, resistance to learning new skills or adopting new technologies, and adherence to traditional rules and routines. So they'd be reluctant to do anything new, see anything new, resistance to new skills or adopting technologies. Everything would revolve around their tradition. And that's why you don't see many Muslims visiting America for the sake of something new, something novel, trying to experience new things, etc. But you see that of all the Western nations, they want to experience new things. They want something novel. They want to see all the perspectives. And so the manifestations in reality, the personal lives, reluctance to leave their familiar environments, resistance to learning new skills or adopting new technologies, and adherence to traditional rules and routines. So at the societal level, rigid political systems resistant to reform, cultural practices that resist modernization, and economic policies that prioritize short-term stability over long-term growth. And some of the consequences are stagnation. Societies and individuals become stagnant, unable to adapt to new challenges or opportunities, leading to a decline. And this makes sense. Like if you are not changing, you're not becoming more efficient, you're not improving as a society, it leads to stagnation, and you're going to be less competitive. You're going to fall behind. You're not going to be able, and I mean, obviously a lot of these countries are probably going to try to pick you up and help you along the way, which is because we're Christian. But it's not going to last forever. Eventually you're going to have to catch up, and the harder you keep pushing back, the more it's going to swing in the opposite direction. So, and that's what happened in the Middle East when they were, I think it was like before Islam and during Islam, there was a golden age where everybody was actually understood Islam, and they had that homeostasis, that balance that they found. And then all of a sudden something drove it out of whack, and it became very imbalanced and right hemispheric in nature because they were so ideologically bent on trying to maintain it. They're like, oh, we found the homeostasis. Now we have to try our best to try to control it. And as they controlled it, they became more ingrained, disciplined, systematic of the left hemisphere. But then it drove them to be more right hemispheric in nature as well. So like they're not only very strict, systematic, etc., but it's of the right hemispheric intuition, emotion, expansive religious doctrine. So alienation, younger generations or those who seek change may feel alienated or oppressed, leading to a social unrest and conflict. So I was thinking about it for a little longer, and it seems more like when both hemispheres are operating for the sake of one of the hemispheres. That's what it seems like is more happening. So it's like if your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere are both in operation for the sake of your left hemispheric way of thinking, perspective, then you get more of a liberal, left-leaning society. When your left hemisphere and right hemisphere are working together for the opposite perspective, which would be more religious, right hemispheric way of thinking, then you get more, stability. So if they're both operating for the sake of the left hemisphere, and that's how you would synthesize what's happening. It's like if both are operating for the sake of your left hemisphere, then you get constant need for change, constant updating, constant changing, etc. And if they're both operating for the right hemisphere, then you get constant stability, leading to oppression, lack of, etc. And I think this is going to bear out. And this is just assumptions. It's just based on the logical conclusions of what you would get from this. And I'm not saying I'll have all the right answers, but if somebody else out there sees these connections, that's what I want. I want people to see the connections, and then I want us to test these things, because I don't have enough time in my life to test or understand these things fully. But I think every part of me thinks they're true. I haven't fully been able to flush out the details of it. And I think it more aligns with, rather than, obviously I don't think just one hemisphere is involved, but it's when both are in service to a particular perspective. And that's how I think I should frame it. And that's how I think it works. So I'm going to read through these quickly, the rest of it. So expanding the dichotomology, balance and integration, a balanced approach. So definition, a balanced approach to change and stability integrates the specifics of both, seeking progress while maintaining a sense of continuity and coherence. It recognizes the value of change for growth and improvement, and the importance of stability for security and identity. So both of these are important in finding the middle ground and the homeostasis, the equilibrium between all these things, which is the homeostasis or heaven, is the ideal. And that's what all these religious people have been trying to get at. It's like homeostasis. That is heaven. That is what they've been aiming at. They didn't realize it, but that's what they've been trying to articulate. So characteristics, adaptable stability, maintaining core values, structures, and traditions while being open to necessary change and improvements. So, and then directed change, implementing changes with clear goals and directions, ensuring they contribute positively to overall stability and progress. So the changes should be for the sake of progress, and the progress should be for the sake of stability. So they're both should be together. Manifestations in reality, personal lives, cultivating a stable home and work environment while pursuing personal growth and new experiences. Finding that work-life balance, right? It's like everyone says it and it makes sense. But finding it is what we have to do as individuals. We have to go out there proactively, understand the way the world works, and figure that out. Societal level, developing policies that promote innovation and reform within a framework that preserves social cohesion and cultural heritage. Benefits. Resilience. Individuals and societies are better equipped to handle disruptions and challenges, maintaining a balance between continuity and adaptation. Sustainable progress. Progress is achieved in ways that builds on past achievements and respects established values, leading to sustainable development. And then a cohesive identity. A balanced approach fosters a sense of identity and purpose that is rooted in tradition while being open to growth and change. So some of these intersecting dichotomies that are involved or underpin change and stability. One is chaos and order. So chaos represents the unpredictable and uncontrollable aspects of change. It is necessary for creativity and new possibilities. Order represents the structured stability necessary for coherence, predictability, and functioning systems. Future and past. Change is inherently forward-looking, focusing on what can become or can be. So past is stability, often looks backwards, valuing tradition, history, and established norms, as well as examples of things that have worked or have not worked. So it's like when you see in the past something that works, you're going to try to maintain it or implement it in society. And that would be based on, you could say, tradition as well. It's like whether it's your tradition or what you formulate as tradition, something you should maintain. Okay, and then you have science versus religion. Science embraces change through discovery, innovation, and questioning of established knowledge. Religion often emphasizes stability through timeless truths, moral constants, and the preservation of spiritual and cultural heritage. And then you have innovation versus tradition. Sorry about that, guys. Then you have innovation versus tradition. Drives change by introducing new ideas, technologies, and ways of thinking. Tradition upholds stability by preserving established practices, beliefs, and cultural heritage. Interplay. Fostering an environment where innovation respects tradition can lead to a stability and sustainable, culturally sensitive progress. So it can be sustainable and culturally sensitive at the same time. And then manifestation reality, change, learning new skills, learning career shifts, personal development, and adapting to life events. And then stability, maintaining routines, relationships, personal values, and traditions that provide comfort and identity. And then societal development, change, social movements, policy reforms, technological innovations, and cultural revolutions. Stability, institutional continuity, law and order, cultural change, and economic policies that prevent volatility. And then, wow, I wrote a lot more than I thought. You have societal development. I just read that one. Environmental adaptation, change, ecosystem evolution, climate change, adaptability, biodiversity shifts, and then you have stability, conservation efforts, sustainable practice, and maintenance of ecological balance. And so you want to find an equilibrium between these things. And each one of these things is going to have their own equilibrium with regard to everything else, which is homeostasis. So you have to take all the equilibriums into account at the same time in order to find homeostasis. So you're trying to find if the equilibrium might be in and of itself in a certain spot, but then when you take this other thing into account, it moves in both. And then you take another thing into account, it moves all three. And then all of them eventually interact to the point where you get to a homeostasis between all of them. And that's how homeostasis works. It's not, there's one thing that's going to be at play. It's going to be, we need to take all this up into account before we can find that homeostasis and equilibrium for each one. So yeah, you can read through some of these, pause them, pause it if you want to read. I'm going to go ahead and call it, because a lot of these just go over some of the same things. I'm just trying to elaborate on it more. But the conclusion is the true dichotomy of change versus stability is a dynamic interplay that shapes every aspect of our lives, societies, and environments. By understanding and respecting both sides of this dichotomy, we can foster a balanced approach that promotes growth and progress while maintaining the foundations that provide society, security, and identity. This equilibrium is essential for creating resilience and thriving communities in an ever-changing world. So the importance of this concept is that it's something that is you can have at every level of a relationship. So your relationship to your friends, how much stability, how much change do you want? Your relationship with yourself, your relationship with society, society's relationship with other people, like you can change that. So we need to be cognizant of the change and the stability we bring in our lives. And I know that's extremely complicated with no direct answers, but just stay away from extreme change, stay away from extreme stability, and our societies will become better. All right. Thank you guys. Love you.